The metal cuffs bit into my wrists as I stared in disbelief at the empty dog bed in the corner of my living room. Max was gone. 3 years of healing together, erased in a single afternoon while I was at work. The yellow notice flapped against my front door in the evening breeze. Animal seized. Repeated violations. At the bottom, that signature I would come to despise. Sheriff Sheila Dawson. My voice shook as I called the station. "Where is my dog? You had no right." "Ma'am, the sheriff had every right," the desk sergeant interrupted. "Multiple documented complaints, aggressive animal, county ordinance violation." I felt my throat tighten. Max isn't aggressive. He's a certified emotional support animal. This is illegal. "Take it up with Sheriff Dawson," he said before hanging up. That night I sat alone in my quiet house, staring at Max's empty food bowl. My hands trembled as rage and fear coursed through me. It was then I realized something that would change everything. Sheriff Sheila had not taken my dog because he barked too much. She had taken him because she could, because no one had ever stood up to her. Until now. My life before all this was quiet, uneventful. That was precisely how I wanted it after the divorce. 3 years had passed since I signed the papers and walked away from a marriage that had slowly drained the life from me. I purchased a small rental house on Maple Street in Cooperville, population 8,742. It was nothing spectacular, just a modest 2-bedroom with a fenced backyard and enough space for me to breathe again. 2 weeks after moving in, I visited the county animal shelter. I had not planned to adopt that day. I told myself I was just looking. But then I saw him, a 3-year-old German Shepherd mix with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold more sadness than any animal should know. The shelter volunteer told me his story as I knelt beside his kennel. His previous owner had died, and no family members claimed him. He had been there for 4 months. "He is good with people, but he gets anxious when left alone too long," she explained. "Most folks want puppies, not adult dogs with issues." I recognized something in those eyes, something familiar, something that mirrored my own journey. We were both starting over, both carrying invisible wounds. "His name is Max," the volunteer said, "though you could change it if you adopt him." "Max is perfect," I replied, and by the end of the day he was curled up on my living room floor, watching me with cautious hope. The first few months required patience. Max would bark when I left for work, a nervous expression of abandonment. I worked with a trainer who specialized in anxiety behaviors. We established routines, created safe spaces, practiced slow separations. By the 6-month mark, Max had transformed. The barking decreased to an occasional announcement when the mail carrier arrived. He became my shadow, my confidant, my reason to maintain structure when depression threatened to pull me under. My neighbors seemed to appreciate him as well. Mrs. Keller from across the street often saved treats for him during our evening walks. Mr. Jacobson at the corner house would pause his gardening to scratch behind Max's ears. Cooperville was that kind of town, or so I believed. People looked out for each other. They waved from porches. They brought casseroles when someone was sick. They minded their own business otherwise. I should have known better. Small towns have long memories and rigid hierarchies. I was still an outsider, even after 3 years. I did not attend the right church. I did not participate in the seasonal festivals with sufficient enthusiasm. I kept to myself, healing quietly with my dog at my side. The first warning came on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. I had just arrived home from my shift at the medical billing office when a county sheriff's department cruiser pulled into my driveway. A young deputy approached with a clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon, ma'am. We received a noise complaint about a dog barking at this address," he said, not unkindly. "Just doing a courtesy check." I frowned, genuinely confused. Max rarely barks anymore. I have been working with him for years on that. Well, the complaint states the barking occurred between 1 and 3 this afternoon. Were you home during that time? No, I was at work, but my neighbor Mrs. Keller watches him through her window sometimes. She has never mentioned any issues. The deputy shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable. Just passing along the complaint. Consider this a verbal warning. If we get additional reports, there could be citations involved. I thanked him and watched as he drove away, a vague sense of unease settling over me. That night, Max slept beside my bed as always, his presence a comfort I had come to rely upon. I dismissed the warning as a misunderstanding. Perhaps someone had confused my house with another. I never imagined that this small interaction would be the first domino in a sequence that would eventually bring a powerful woman to her knees and force an entire town to confront its darkest secrets. The morning after the deputy's visit, I decided to be proactive. I baked lemon bars, my grandmother's recipe, and took them to Mrs. Keller. At 78, she spent most of her days watching the neighborhood from her front window, an unofficial sentinel of Maple Street. If anyone knew about a barking complaint, it would be her. "Gracious, these smell divine," she said, inviting me into her living room. The space was cluttered with decades of collected trinkets and framed photos of grandchildren. She poured coffee into delicate china cups that looked too fragile to hold liquid. "Mrs. Keller, did you happen to notice Max barking yesterday afternoon?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She adjusted her glasses and studied me. "Not a peep from your boy. He was sunning himself in the yard most of the time, quiet as can be." I explained about the deputy's visit. Mrs. Keller's expression changed immediately, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That would be Sheila's doing," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Sheila, Sheriff Sheila Dawson, lives 3 houses down from you on the other side of the street. Her backyard backs up to yours, separated by that line of tall pines." Mrs. Keller leaned forward. "Been sheriff for 12 years now. Runs unopposed every election." I tried to recall if I had ever met this woman. The name was vaguely familiar from local news, but our paths had never crossed. Why would she complain about Max? He is trained, he rarely barks. Mrs. Keller sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Sheila does not need reasons, dear. She creates them. Last spring, she had the Henderson boys' basketball hoop removed for being too close to the road. It was on their property, mind you. Year before that, she threatened to arrest Mr. Finch for his yard art, said it violated some obscure town ordinance." My stomach tightened. "That cannot be legal." "Legal?" Mrs. Keller scoffed. "Around here, legal is whatever Sheila says it is. Her brother sits on the town council. Her cousin is the judge. Most folks just stay out of her way." I thanked Mrs. Keller for the information and walked home slowly, processing what I had learned. That afternoon, I drove past the address Mrs. Keller had indicated. The house was larger than others on the street, immaculately maintained with stark white trim and not a single weed in the flower beds. A campaign sign from the previous election still stood near the mailbox. "Re-elect Sheriff Dawson. Safety first." In the driveway sat an official sheriff's department SUV. The next morning, I spotted a woman in a crisp uniform retrieving her mail. I recognized the sheriff's uniform immediately. Tan shirt, dark brown pants with a gold stripe, a star-shaped badge catching the morning light. I had rehearsed what I would say, how I would introduce myself politely and clear up any misunderstanding about Max. I approached with a friendly wave. "Good morning. I am your neighbor from down the street. I wanted to introduce myself and—" Sheriff Dawson turned to face me. She was in her 50s, hair pulled back in a severe bun, not a strand out of place. Her eyes, cold and assessing, swept over me from head to toe. "I know who you are," she interrupted. Her voice was level, professional, devoid of any warmth. "Is there a problem I can help you with?" "I understand there was a complaint about my dog barking. I wanted to assure you that Max is well trained and file a formal response with the department if you have concerns about a complaint," she said, cutting me off again. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward her house. I stood there, stunned by the dismissal. As I walked home, my neighbor Rick called out from his driveway. "I see you met the sheriff," he said with a knowing look. "Is she always that pleasant?" I asked. Rick glanced around before speaking, lowering his voice. "Word of advice, stay off her radar. 2 years ago, my cousin disputed a traffic ticket Sheila gave him. Next thing you know, deputies were searching his car every time they saw him in town. Found a reason to arrest him eventually." "That is harassment," I said, incredulous. "That is Cooperville," Rick replied with a shrug. That Friday, a certified letter arrived. Inside was an official citation for persistent animal noise disturbance with a fine of $100. The form listed 2 reported incidents, the original complaint and apparently another from the following day. There was no evidence attached, no recording, nothing to substantiate the claim. Just a signature at the bottom, Sheriff S. Dawson. I stared at the paper in disbelief. $100 was not a small amount for me. More concerning was the notation indicating this was now a documented offense in county records. Something cold settled in my stomach as I realized this was not a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. This was personal. That night, I researched the county noise ordinances. The citation referenced Code 73B, which required documented evidence of sustained barking for more than 30 minutes. I had been working with Max for years. Even at his worst, he had never barked continuously for half an hour. Someone was lying, and the law said I had the right to contest the citation. What I did not realize then was that I had already made a critical mistake. By approaching Sheila directly, I had challenged her authority. In her world, that was unforgivable. The citation was not about noise. It was about putting me in my place. The week after receiving the citation, I paid the fine. Not because I believed we were guilty, but because fighting it seemed like more trouble than it was worth. I told myself it was a one-time annoyance, that Sheriff Dawson would move on to other targets. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I left for work at my usual time, 7:30 in the morning. Max followed his routine breakfast, short walk around the yard, then settling on his bed near the living room window where he could watch the neighborhood. Mrs. Keller later told me she saw him napping peacefully at noon. I returned home at 5:45 that evening. As I turned onto Maple Street, something felt wrong. The sensation intensified as I approached my house. The front gate was open, not just unlocked but standing wide open. I never left it that way. Max could escape. I rushed inside, calling his name. Silence answered me. His water bowl was knocked over, water still pooled on the kitchen floor. His leash, which normally hung by the door, was missing. Panic rose in my throat as I searched each room. When I returned to the front door, I noticed the yellow paper taped to it. The official letterhead of the Cooperville Animal Control Division was printed across the top. Below it, typed in cold, bureaucratic language: Notice of animal seizure. Date, September 21. Time, 14:37. Animal, German Shepherd mix male. Reason for seizure: multiple violations of Ordinance 73B, noise disturbance. Additional concerns: potentially aggressive behavior. Current location, County Animal Holding Facility. Contact, Sheriff Department, Enforcement Division. At the bottom was a signature I now recognized immediately, Sheriff S. Dawson. My hands shook as I read the notice 3 times, trying to process what had happened. They had taken Max, entered my property while I was gone and taken him. The room spun around me as I fumbled for my phone. I called the sheriff's department, my voice breaking as I spoke to the dispatcher. My dog was taken today. I need to speak with someone about getting him back immediately. Hold please, the dispatcher said, sounding bored. After several minutes, a man's voice came on the line. Deputy Morris, how can I help you? I explained the situation, words tumbling out faster than I could control them. Deputy Morris sighed heavily. Yes, ma'am. The animal was seized under direct order from Sheriff Dawson, following multiple documented complaints about aggressive barking and threatening behavior toward a passerby. Threatening behavior, that is absurd. Max is gentle, he has never threatened anyone. Ma'am, the report states the animal charged the fence and displayed aggressive posturing toward the sheriff while she was conducting a neighborhood patrol. My mind raced. She was in my yard, she has no right. Sheriff Dawson observed the behavior from public property, he interrupted. After consulting the previous complaints, she determined the animal posed a potential community safety risk and ordered seizure under county ordinance. This is illegal. I want to see these supposed complaints. I want my dog back now. You will need to file an appeal with the county clerk's office. The animal will remain in custody pending investigation. Where is he? I need to see him. There was a pause. The animal has been transferred to the county holding facility in Westbrook. My heart sank. Westbrook was nearly 40 miles away. When can I pick him up? As I said, you need to file an appeal first. The hearing will determine if the animal can be released back to your custody or if further action is warranted. Further action, what does that mean? Deputy Morris cleared his throat. In cases of documented aggressive behavior, the county sometimes recommends behavioral euthanasia. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. Euthanasia? You cannot be serious. This is insane. Max is not aggressive. File your appeal, ma'am. That is all I can tell you. After hanging up, I stood in my empty house, the silence deafening. Max's bed sat empty in the corner. His favorite toy, a worn tennis ball, lay abandoned on the carpet. Something inside me broke. Tears streamed down my face as I sank to the floor. I called in sick to work the next morning and drove to the sheriff's department. The building was small but imposing, concrete and glass with the department seal emblazoned on the front doors. Inside, the receptionist looked up with practiced indifference. I need to speak with Sheriff Dawson, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. The sheriff is not available. Do you have an appointment? No, but this is urgent. She had my dog seized yesterday without cause. The receptionist's expression did not change. You will need to file the appropriate paperwork with the county clerk. I want to know what evidence she has. I want to see the complaints. You can submit a records request. The processing time is 15 to 20 business days. I felt my control slipping. 20 days, my dog could be euthanized by then. Please lower your voice, ma'am. I noticed a deputy watching me from across the room, hand resting casually on his belt near his taser. The message was clear: cause a scene, and you will regret it. I left the station and drove directly to the county holding facility in Westbrook. The building was sterile and smelled of industrial disinfectant. A board attendant informed me that I could not see Max without authorization from the sheriff's department. "Can you at least tell me if he is okay?" I pleaded. "He has separation anxiety. He needs his medication." The attendant softened slightly. "Look, I cannot let you see him, but I will make sure he gets checked by the vet. Bring his medication, and I will see that he gets it." I thanked him and returned to my car, where I finally broke down completely. Sobs racked my body as I gripped the steering wheel. The emptiness of my house, the casual cruelty of the system, the helplessness. It was all too familiar, the same powerlessness I had felt during the worst days of my marriage. Something shifted inside me then. A realization, cold and clear. I had escaped one controlling relationship only to find myself under the thumb of another abuser. Sheriff Sheila Dawson had taken something precious from me because she could, because she expected me to cower, to beg, to break. I dried my tears and started the car. This was not going to end like my marriage had, with me retreating in defeat. This time I would fight. This time I would win. And I would make damn sure that Sheila Dawson never forgot the day she decided to take my dog. The county clerk's office occupied the east wing of the Cooperville Municipal Building, a century-old structure with creaking floors and the perpetual smell of old paper. The woman behind the counter, her nameplate read, Margaret Wilson, looked up from her computer as I approached. "I need to file an appeal for a wrongful animal seizure," I said, placing my driver's license on the counter. Margaret's eyes flickered with recognition, though we had never met. The German Shepherd on Maple Street. I nodded, surprised. "News travels fast here," she explained, pulling a form from a drawer. "Fill this out. Filing fee is $75. Another fee. More money I could barely afford. I bit back my frustration and completed the paperwork, detailing Max's training history, his emotional support certification, and the lack of prior incidents. As I handed over the form and my credit card, Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Listen," she whispered, "you might want to talk to Richard Galloway over on Pine Street. He had some trouble with the sheriff last spring." I thanked her and left, the appeal receipt folded carefully in my pocket. On my way home, I stopped at the hardware store and bought 2 security cameras, expensive but necessary. If Sheila or her deputies came onto my property again, I wanted evidence. That evening, I drove to Pine Street and found the address for Richard Galloway. He was in his 70s, thin and stooped but with sharp eyes that assessed me carefully from his porch. "Mrs. Wilson from the clerk's office suggested I speak with you," I explained after introducing myself. "I am having some issues with Sheriff Dawson." The mention of Sheila's name transformed his expression. He glanced up and down the street before motioning me inside. His living room was cluttered with woodworking tools and half-finished projects. "So she's after you now," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "What did you do to get on her list?" I explained about Max, the complaints, and the seizure. Richard nodded knowingly. "Last April, I was building a shed in my backyard. Had all the permits. Sheila showed up one afternoon saying someone reported suspicious activity. Next day, all my tools were gone. Just gone. She claimed they were seized as evidence in an investigation of construction without proper permits." "But you had permits," I said. "Sure did. Took me 3 weeks to get them back. By then, I had missed the window for completing the project before the rainy season. Sheila knew exactly what she was doing." Richard was not the only one. He gave me 4 more names, people who had crossed paths with Sheriff Dawson and paid prices ranging from harassment to wrongful arrests. The next morning, I visited Eleanor Jenkins, a retired teacher who lived on the other side of town. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured tea. "My grandson was pulled over 8 times in 1 month," she told me. "Never ticketed, just detained. Made him late for work repeatedly until he got fired. All because he dated Sheila's niece against her wishes." By the end of the week, I had spoken with 7 people. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Sheila Dawson wielded her badge like a weapon, targeting those who displeased her with the full force of her authority. Citations for non-existent violations, property seized under questionable pretenses, arrests that never resulted in charges but left permanent marks on records. Most disturbing were the cases involving the county judge, Thomas Harding, Sheila's cousin. Appeals mysteriously denied, evidence overlooked. The system was not broken. It was functioning exactly as intended, protecting its own. I spent evenings researching county ordinances, state laws regarding law enforcement authority, and animal seizure regulations. I created a timeline of Sheriff Dawson's actions against others in the community. I installed cameras at my front and back doors, angled to capture anyone approaching my property. During my research, I discovered something crucial. While Sheriff Dawson had the authority to respond to complaints, animal seizures required either a direct observation of dangerous behavior or a court order. According to the county records I could access online, no such order had been filed regarding Max. She had bypassed proper channels, acted unilaterally, and counted on my ignorance and fear to prevent any challenge. 3 days after filing my appeal, I received a call from Deputy Hayes, a young officer I had not met before. "Ms. Marshall, this is Deputy Hayes from the Sheriff's Department." His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Look, I cannot talk long. I just thought you should know Sheriff Dawson is watching your house. She has deputies driving by several times a day." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, suspicious of a trap. "Not everyone in the department agrees with how things are done around here," he said carefully. "Just be careful what you say on the phone. Keep your head down. Document everything." He hung up before I could thank him. That night, I noticed a patrol car driving slowly past my house 3 times. The message was clear. I was being watched. The next morning, I created a private social media post, careful not to name names or make direct accusations. I simply told my story: a dog seized without evidence, a pattern of targeted enforcement, a community living in fear of its own protectors. I ended with a question: how many of us have stayed silent? Within hours, the post had been shared dozens of times. My phone began buzzing with messages from people I had never met, all with their own Sheila stories. What had started as a personal fight was becoming something larger, a community finding its voice. As support grew, so did my determination. Max had been gone for 9 days now. I visited the holding facility twice, each time denied access but assured he was being cared for. Each night I returned to my empty house, his absence a physical ache. But something else was growing alongside my grief: resolve. Sheila Dawson had miscalculated. She thought taking Max would break me, force me to submit like so many others had. Instead, she had awakened something she never anticipated: a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. My appeal hearing was scheduled for October 15th, 3 weeks away. Too long to leave Max in a kennel, separated from his medication and routine. I needed to accelerate the process, but legal avenues seemed deliberately slow. I called every attorney in Cooperville. All 5 declined to represent me, each offering vague excuses about caseloads or conflicts of interest. The unspoken truth hung in the air: no local lawyer wanted to challenge Sheriff Dawson. I expanded my search to neighboring counties and found Patricia Reeves, an animal rights attorney in Westbrook who specialized in wrongful seizure cases. Her office was small but professional, diplomas and photos of rescued animals covering the walls. "This is not my first rodeo with small-town law enforcement," Patricia said after reviewing my documentation. "But Sheila Dawson has quite the reputation. Even attorneys in Westbrook know to tread carefully." "Can you help me?" I asked. Patricia studied me for a moment. "I can represent you at the appeal hearing, but you need to understand something. This is not just about your dog anymore. Once you challenge someone like Sheriff Dawson, she will come at you with everything she has." "She already took everything that matters," I replied. Patricia nodded. "Then let us build a case they cannot ignore. I need every piece of evidence you have collected so far: the citation, the seizure notice, your security footage, the testimonials from other residents." While Patricia worked on the legal strategy, I continued gathering information. I filed formal requests for public records related to animal control cases over the past 5 years. I documented each patrol car that passed my house, noting times and frequencies. I maintained my online presence, becoming a focal point for others who had faced similar treatment. A week before the hearing, I received an unexpected ally. James Turner, editor of the Cooperville Gazette, contacted me after seeing my social media posts. "I have been hearing these stories for years," he admitted during our meeting at a cafe 2 towns over. "But no one would go on record. No one had proof. You have both. Are you willing to publish it?" I asked. "Sheriff Dawson wields a lot of influence here." James twisted his coffee cup nervously. "My publisher is hesitant, but I convinced him that if we do not run this story, someone else will. The social media momentum is too strong to ignore now." 2 days later, the Gazette published a front-page article. Allegations of abuse of power raise questions about Sheriff's Department. While carefully avoiding direct accusations, the piece detailed multiple instances of questionable enforcement actions, including Max's seizure. Sheriff Dawson declined to comment for the article. The morning after publication, I awoke to find a citation taped to my front door. According to the notice, my fence was now in violation of County Code 5-2C, improper height and insufficient structural integrity. The fine was $200, with a warning that failure to remedy the violation within 10 days would result in additional penalties. My security camera had captured the entire scene. Deputy Morris, clearly uncomfortable, placing the citation on my door at 6:15 a.m., looking over his shoulder as if afraid to be seen. I forwarded the footage to Patricia immediately. "This is exactly what we need," she said when she called. "Clear evidence of targeted enforcement. They are retaliating against you for speaking out." That evening, while checking my backyard camera footage, I noticed something disturbing. At 1:37 a.m., a flashlight beam had swept across my yard. The camera captured a figure moving along the property line, someone in uniform examining my fence. The image was grainy but unmistakable: Sheriff Sheila Dawson, trespassing on my property in the middle of the night. I uploaded the footage to a private server and created a backup. Then, using an anonymous account, I posted selected still images to a local community forum with the simple caption, "Why is our sheriff inspecting private property at 1:37 a.m. without a warrant?" The post exploded overnight. By morning, it had been shared across multiple platforms. Local television stations picked up the story. Sheriff Dawson's office released a terse statement claiming she had been responding to reports of suspicious activity, but provided no details about what those reports entailed or why they warranted a middle-of-the-night inspection by the sheriff herself. Public sentiment was shifting rapidly. Comments on news articles and social media posts revealed a community finding courage in numbers. People began sharing their own experiences, their own suspicions, their own fears. 3 days before the scheduled hearing, I received a call from the county clerk's office. "Ms. Marshall, this is Margaret Wilson. I wanted to let you know your appeal hearing has been moved up. Judge Anderson will hear your case tomorrow at 9 a.m. Judge Anderson, not Judge Harding, Sheila's cousin. The sudden change suggested intervention from higher authorities, perhaps responding to the growing public scrutiny. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, my heart racing. "Do you know why it was moved up?" There was a pause. Let us just say certain people would prefer this matter resolved quickly and quietly. Be prepared for anything tomorrow. I called Patricia immediately, and we spent the evening preparing our case. We gathered affidavits from neighbors testifying to Max's good behavior, veterinary records showing his clean history, and documentation of his emotional support animal status. Most importantly, we had evidence of Sheriff Dawson's pattern of targeted enforcement and her unauthorized trespassing on my property. That night I could not sleep. I paced my empty house, stopping occasionally at Max's bed, running my fingers over his favorite toys. Tomorrow would determine whether he came home or remained in limbo. Tomorrow would determine whether one woman's abuse of power would finally face consequences. As dawn broke, I stood in front of my mirror, rehearsing what I would say in court. The face looking back at me was changed, harder, more determined than the woman who had received that first citation weeks ago. Sheriff Sheila Dawson had meant to crush me with her power. Instead, she had created her worst nightmare. Someone with nothing left to lose, someone who was not afraid anymore, someone who had found her voice and was ready to use it. The morning after my security footage captured Sheriff Dawson trespassing on my property, I knew the battle lines had been drawn. This was no longer about Max alone. This had become a test of wills, a clash between a woman with power and a woman with purpose. My purpose was clear: bring Max home and expose the corruption that had been poisoning Cooperville for years. I awoke to the sound of an official vehicle pulling into my driveway. Through the window, I saw Deputy Morris approaching my front door with another yellow notice in hand. I met him on the porch before he could tape it to my door. "Another citation, Deputy?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger churning inside me. He avoided my eyes as he handed me the paper. "Code violation, property maintenance issue." I glanced at the notice. "Unsafe fence structure in violation of County Ordinance 84B, fine, $250. Correction required within 7 days or additional penalties will apply." "My fence has been this way for 3 years," I said. "Never been an issue before." Deputy Morris shifted uncomfortably. "Just doing my job, ma'am." Are you doing Sheriff Dawson's dirty work?" I kept my voice low but firm. "My security cameras recorded her inspecting my property at 1:30 in the morning without a warrant. That is trespassing, Deputy." His eyes widened slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "I suggest you address any concerns through proper channels, ma'am." "Oh, I intend to," I replied. "In fact, I intend to use every channel available." After he left, I examined the citation closely. The alleged violation concerned the height and structural integrity of my backyard fence, the same fence Sheila had been examining in the middle of the night with her flashlight. The timing was not coincidental. This was retaliation for my appeal, for my investigation, for daring to challenge her authority. That afternoon, I made 2 significant decisions. First, I contacted James at the Gazette again, sharing the new citation and explaining how it followed my public stance against Sheriff Dawson. Second, I prepared the security footage for release. While I had hoped to save it for the appeal hearing, Sheila's escalation demanded a response. Using an anonymous account on a local community forum, I uploaded 3 still images from the video. Sheriff Dawson approaching my fence line, Sheriff Dawson on my property examining the fence with a flashlight, and Sheriff Dawson writing notes while standing in my backyard. I included a simple caption: "Why is our sheriff conducting property inspections at 1:37 a.m. without a warrant or homeowner notification?" The post ignited immediately. By evening, it had been shared hundreds of times across multiple platforms. The comment sections filled with outrage, questions, and, most importantly, similar stories from other residents. What had begun as my isolated struggle against Sheila Dawson was transforming into a community awakening. The Sheriff's Department issued a terse statement the following day. Sheriff Dawson was responding to reports of suspicious activity in the area and conducting routine patrol. Any suggestion of impropriety is unfounded. The statement only fueled the controversy. If there had been reports of suspicious activity, why were no incident reports filed? Why was the sheriff herself conducting a routine patrol rather than a deputy? Why did this patrol involve entering private property without permission? Local news outlets picked up the story. A reporter from the Westbrook Herald called me for comment. I chose my words carefully, focusing on factual details rather than accusations. "I have filed an appeal regarding the seizure of my emotional support animal," I explained. "Since then, I have received additional citations that appear to be retaliatory in nature. My security cameras recorded Sheriff Dawson on my property without permission in the middle of the night. I simply want fairness and transparency." While I refrained from direct accusations in public, I continued building my case in private. Patricia had advised me to document every interaction, every patrol car passing my house, every piece of evidence that showed a pattern of targeted enforcement. 3 nights after posting the security images, I received an unexpected phone call. The county clerk's office number appeared on my screen. "Ms. Marshall, this is Margaret Wilson from the county clerk's office." Her voice was hushed, as if she were calling from a place where she might be overheard. "I thought you should know your appeal hearing has been rescheduled." My heart sank, expecting a delay. For when? "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Judge Anderson's courtroom." "Tomorrow," I repeated, stunned. The original hearing had been weeks away. Why the sudden change? "Judge Harding has recused himself due to potential conflict of interest. Judge Anderson from the circuit court will hear the case instead." She paused. "Between us, there is pressure from the county commissioner's office to resolve this quickly. Your social media posts have attracted attention beyond Cooperville." After thanking Margaret, I called Patricia immediately. We had expected to have weeks to prepare our case, and now we had less than 24 hours. "This is actually good news," Patricia said after I explained the situation. "Judge Anderson has no connection to Sheriff Dawson. He is known for being fair and by the book. They are trying to contain this before it gets bigger, which means they know they are vulnerable." We spent the next several hours organizing our evidence, preparing statements, and strategizing our approach. Patricia suggested we focus on 3 key points: the lack of documented evidence for the original complaints about Max, Sheriff Dawson's personal involvement in the enforcement actions, and the pattern of escalating citations following my appeal. "Remember," Patricia cautioned as we finished our preparation near midnight, "Sheriff Dawson will be in uniform. She will have deputies present. She will use every symbol of authority to intimidate you. Stay calm, stay focused, and remember that the law is on your side. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Max alone in a kennel, confused and anxious without his medication. I imagined him wondering why I had abandoned him, why I had not come for him. The thought was almost unbearable. Dawn found me sitting on my back porch, watching the sun rise over the pine trees that separated my yard from Sheriff Dawson's property. In just a few hours, I would face her in court. The woman who had taken my dog. The woman who had used her badge to bully an entire town into submission. The woman who had gravely underestimated what I was willing to do to bring Max home. As I sipped my coffee, a patrol car drove slowly past my house, the fourth such pass since midnight. I raised my mug in a mock toast. Let them watch. Let them report back to Sheila. Nothing would stop me now. The hearing was hours away, and for the first time since Max had been taken, I felt something that had been missing for too long: hope. The county courthouse stood in the center of Cooperville, a limestone and brick building from another era. Its facade projected permanence and authority, qualities that had served Sheriff Dawson well over the years. Today, however, those same walls would witness her first significant challenge. I arrived an hour early, dressed in a simple navy blue suit that I had not worn since my divorce proceedings. Patricia met me on the courthouse steps, her briefcase bulging with documents. "Ready for this?" she asked. "More than ready," I replied, smoothing my jacket. "Any last-minute advice?" "Just remember, she wants you emotional. She wants you angry. Do not give her that satisfaction." Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators. I recognized faces from around town: Mrs. Keller, Richard Galloway, Alina Jenkins, and many others who had shared their stories with me. James from the Gazette sat in the back row with his notebook. A reporter from the regional news station stood outside with a camera crew. "Word travels fast," Patricia murmured. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Anderson entered, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He had a reputation for fairness that extended beyond county lines. As we rose for his entrance, the side door opened and Sheriff Dawson strode in, flanked by 2 deputies and the county attorney. She wore her full uniform, tan shirt crisp and pressed, badge gleaming, utility belt loaded with equipment. Her hair was pulled back in the same severe bun I had seen that first morning. Her eyes briefly met mine, cold and assessing, before she took her seat at the respondent's table. Case number 2023, CV 456, Marshall versus Cooperville Sheriff's Department regarding animal seizure, the clerk announced. Judge Anderson peered over his glasses at the assembled parties. "I have reviewed the filings in this matter. This is an appeal of an administrative action, specifically the seizure of an animal under county ordinance. Ms. Reeves, as the petitioner's counsel, you may begin." Patricia rose, her manner calm and professional. "Your Honor, this case is about more than a simple animal seizure. It is about due process, proper procedure, and the limits of enforcement authority." She outlined our argument methodically. Max was a certified emotional support animal with no history of aggressive behavior. The complaints that led to his seizure were unsubstantiated: no recordings, no sworn statements, no independent verification. Most importantly, the seizure occurred without the required court order specified in the county's own regulations. Furthermore, Patricia continued, displaying the security footage on a laptop for the judge, after my client filed this appeal, Sheriff Dawson personally entered her property without permission at 1, 7:37 a.m. to conduct what appears to be an unauthorized inspection, which resulted in additional citations that we believe are retaliatory in nature. The county attorney, a young man named Robert Collins, objected immediately. "Your Honor, the security footage is irrelevant to the animal seizure case before the court." "I disagree," Patricia countered. "It establishes a pattern of targeted enforcement following my client's decision to appeal the seizure. It speaks directly to the sheriff's department's motivations and methods." Judge Anderson considered this briefly. "I will allow it for context. Continue, Ms. Reeves." Patricia presented affidavits from neighbors testifying to Max's good behavior, veterinary records showing no incidents of aggression, and documentation of his emotional support animal status. She concluded by requesting Max's immediate return and dismissal of all subsequent citations. When it was the county's turn, Attorney Collins argued that Sheriff Dawson had acted within her authority. "The sheriff has broad discretion in matters of public safety," he insisted. The animal had been the subject of multiple complaints, and the sheriff determined it posed a potential risk. "Where are these complaints documented?" Judge Anderson interrupted. "I see no copies in the file." Collins hesitated. "The complaints were received verbally, Your Honor." "All of them, no written statements, no recordings of the calls." "Sheriff Dawson personally observed the animal's behavior," Collins offered. "Did Sheriff Dawson document these observations in an incident report?" Another pause. "I would need to verify that, Your Honor." Judge Anderson turned his attention to Sheriff Dawson. "Sheriff, would you care to address the court regarding the procedures followed in this case?" Sheriff Dawson stood, her posture rigid. "Your Honor, I have served this community for 12 years. In that time, I have developed an instinct for troublesome situations. The dog in question displayed aggressive behavior toward me personally during a routine patrol." "When did this occur?" the judge asked. "Approximately 2 weeks before the seizure." "And did you document this incident?" "I noted it in my patrol log." Judge Anderson glanced through the file before him. "I do not see any patrol logs included in the evidence. Moreover, I do not see the court order required by County Ordinance 75C for seizure of an animal absent immediate danger." For the first time, I saw Sheriff Dawson's composure slip slightly. "Your Honor, as the chief law enforcement officer of this county, I exercised my judgment in the interest of public safety." "Sheriff Dawson," Judge Anderson said, his voice level but firm, "your position grants you authority under the law, not above it. The county ordinances are quite clear regarding the procedures for animal seizure. Those procedures were not followed in this case." The courtroom remained silent as Judge Anderson made notes. I could feel the tension radiating from Sheriff Dawson even from across the room. This was not going as she had planned. "In addition," the judge continued, looking up from his notes, "I find the timing and nature of subsequent enforcement actions against Ms. Marshall troubling. They suggest a potential misuse of authority for personal purposes." Sheriff Dawson's jaw tightened visibly. "Your Honor, I resent the implication." "This is not about implications, Sheriff. This is about procedures and evidence, both of which are lacking in this case." Judge Anderson removed his glasses and addressed the courtroom. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that the seizure of the animal in question occurred without proper authority or procedure. I hereby order the immediate return of the animal to the petitioner, Ms. Marshall. Furthermore, I am dismissing the subsequent citations issued to Ms. Marshall pending further review." He turned directly to Sheriff Dawson. "Sheriff, I am also referring this matter to the County Commissioner's Office for review of departmental procedures. Court is adjourned." The gavel struck with a finality that echoed through the suddenly buzzing courtroom. Patricia squeezed my arm gently. "We won," she whispered. "Max is coming home." I watched as Sheriff Dawson conferred urgently with the county attorney, her expression dark. When she finally looked in my direction, I did not see the contrition I had hoped for. I saw anger. I saw wounded pride. And I saw something else, fear. For perhaps the first time in her career, Sheriff Sheila Dawson was facing consequences. As we left the courtroom, reporters clustered around us. I answered their questions briefly and factually, focusing on Max rather than Sheila. This victory, significant as it was, felt like only the beginning. The day after the hearing, I drove to the county animal holding facility in Westbrook to bring Max home. The reunion brought tears to my eyes, his exuberant barking, his whole body wiggling with joy as he recognized me. The facility staff had cared for him adequately, but he had lost weight, and his coat had lost its luster. The veterinarian confirmed what I already suspected. Max had experienced significant stress during our separation. "He will be fine," the vet assured me. "Continue his medication and routine. Give him time to readjust." That evening, Max curled up in his bed, watching my every move as if afraid I might disappear again. I sat beside him, running my fingers through his fur, whispering promises I intended to keep. We were together again, but our story was far from over. The court victory had exposed Sheriff Dawson's misconduct, but it had not addressed the systemic issues that had allowed her reign of intimidation to continue for so long. The media coverage of the hearing had spread beyond our small community. Regional newspapers ran articles questioning Sheriff Dawson's conduct. The video of her trespassing on my property at night had gone viral, generating outrage well beyond county lines. The county commissioners announced a formal review of sheriff's department procedures, and rumors circulated about an internal investigation. 3 days after Max's return, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. "Ms. Marshall, this is David Larson, Cooperville Town Manager. I was hoping we might be able to meet to discuss recent events." The request surprised me. The town manager rarely involved himself in sheriff's department matters, which fell under county jurisdiction. "What specifically would you like to discuss?" I asked. "There has been considerable public reaction to your situation. The town council feels it would be beneficial to find a resolution that addresses community concerns while allowing everyone to move forward." I consulted Patricia before agreeing to the meeting. "This sounds like damage control," she warned. "They are worried about liability and public perception. Be careful." The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon at the town hall. I arrived to find not only David Larson, but also 2 town council members and the county commissioner, Angela Barnes. Conspicuously absent was Sheriff Dawson herself. "Thank you for coming," Larson began once we were seated in the conference room. "We wanted to discuss a path forward that would address your concerns while allowing the community to heal." Commissioner Barnes nodded. "The incident with your dog should never have happened. We are implementing procedural changes to ensure proper protocols are followed in the future." "That is good to hear," I replied carefully. "But what about accountability for what has already occurred?" The officials exchanged glances. "Sheriff Dawson has agreed to meet with you privately to discuss resolution," Larson explained. "She understands the situation could have been handled differently." "A private meeting," I repeated, suspicious of their intentions. "What exactly would that accomplish?" "It would give both parties an opportunity to express their perspectives," Commissioner Barnes suggested. Sometimes misunderstandings can be resolved through direct communication. I almost laughed at the characterization. This had not been a misunderstanding. It had been a deliberate abuse of power. But I nodded thoughtfully, seeing an opportunity. I would be open to a meeting with Sheriff Dawson, I said. When would this occur? She is available tomorrow morning at 10, Larson replied, clearly relieved by my response. Her office at the sheriff's department. After consulting again with Patricia, I developed a strategy. Pennsylvania was a one-party consent state for recordings. I could legally record our conversation without informing Sheila. Patricia advised me to focus on asking questions rather than making accusations, to let Sheila talk as much as possible. Do not expect an actual apology, Patricia warned. She will likely try to justify her actions or minimize what happened. Keep your emotions in check and remember why you are there, to get her on record. The next morning I prepared carefully. I dressed professionally, placed a small digital recorder in my pocket, and reviewed the questions I wanted to ask. Max watched anxiously as I prepared to leave, sensing my tension. I will be back soon, I promised him. This is for both of us. The sheriff's department looked different now that I entered it with purpose rather than desperation. Deputies glanced at me with curious expressions as I was escorted to Sheriff Dawson's office. She sat behind her desk, uniform immaculate as always, badge prominently displayed. The office was a monument to her authority, commendations on the walls, photographs with state officials, service awards in a glass case. Ms. Marshall, she said with a nod, not standing to greet me, please sit. I took the offered chair, keeping my expression neutral. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Sheriff Dawson. The town manager seemed to think it necessary, she replied, her tone suggesting this was an imposition rather than a reconciliation attempt. I believe it is, I said calmly. What happened with Max should never have occurred. Sheila leaned back in her chair, studying me. Sometimes enforcement actions are necessary to maintain community standards. Perhaps if you had addressed the initial complaints properly, escalation would not have been required. I felt the recorder in my pocket, a silent witness to her words. What specific complaints prompted you to seize my dog without a court order? A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. As I explained in court, I observed aggressive behavior myself. That, combined with prior complaints, justified intervention. Prior complaints that were never documented, I noted. Not everything requires documentation, she replied, her voice taking on a condescending tone. Sometimes people need to be reminded of the community standards, of their place in things. Their place. She leaned forward slightly. Listen, Ms. Marshall, I have kept this town safe for 12 years. Sometimes that means making examples of those who do not fall in line. Maybe I went a little too far with your dog situation, but the message needed to be sent. What message is that? I asked, keeping my voice even despite my rising anger. That in Cooperville we respect authority, we follow rules, we do not create disturbances. A small, satisfied smile formed on her lips. Your dog was just the vehicle for the lesson you needed to learn. The admission was more explicit than I had dared hope for. Sheriff Sheila Dawson had just confessed to using her position to teach me a lesson. Not to enforce the law, not to protect public safety, but to establish her dominance. I see, I said simply. Thank you for being so honest about your motivations. Something in my tone must have alerted her because her expression changed, becoming more guarded. This conversation is off the record, of course. I am simply trying to help you understand the larger context. I stood, having what I needed. "Of course. Thank you for your time, Sheriff." As I left the building, my heart pounded with a mixture of disgust and triumph. The recording in my pocket was more damning than I could have anticipated. Sheriff Dawson had not offered an apology. Instead, she had given me something far more valuable: the truth. The recording of Sheriff Dawson's admission spread like wildfire through our community. I had initially shared it only with Patricia, who arranged for a carefully edited version, highlighting only Sheila's statements about teaching lessons and making examples, to be posted online with my permission. Within hours, the audio had been shared thousands of times. By the following day, it had reached state-level news outlets. Sheriff admits to using position for personal vendettas. Read the headline in the Westbrook Herald. The story included quotes from the recording, alongside a summary of the court case, and the growing number of similar accounts from other residents. The reaction was swift and decisive. The county commissioners called an emergency session and voted unanimously to suspend Sheriff Dawson pending a full investigation. The state attorney general's office announced it would review potential civil rights violations. Former deputies, no longer fearful of retaliation, began coming forward with their own accounts of witnessing misconduct. Deputy Hayes, the young officer who had warned me about surveillance, gave an anonymous interview to the Gazette. There was an unwritten policy, he revealed. If the sheriff had a problem with someone, we were expected to find reasons to cite them, pull them over, make their lives difficult. Those who refused faced consequences: bad shifts, unfavorable evaluations, isolation. 3 days after the release of the recording, the county commissioners organized a public forum. The high school gymnasium was packed beyond capacity. People stood along the walls and spilled out into the hallway. Commissioner Barnes opened the meeting with a formal acknowledgement. "It has become clear that there have been serious lapses in oversight and accountability within the sheriff's department," she admitted. "Tonight, we want to hear from you, the citizens of Cooperville, about your experiences." What followed was both heartbreaking and cathartic. For over 3 hours, residents approached the microphone to share stories they had kept hidden for years. An elderly man described being threatened with arrest for questioning a traffic ticket. A small business owner recounted how her store was subjected to repeated safety inspections after she supported Sheila's opponent in an election. Parents told of teenage children targeted for minor infractions that somehow never appeared in official records. I sat in the back row, listening in stunned silence. My experience with Max, painful as it had been, now seemed merely one thread in a vast tapestry of abuse. Sheriff Dawson had not created an efficient law enforcement department. She had built a fiefdom where her word was law and her grudges became policy. Halfway through the forum, Richard Galloway approached the microphone. The elderly man whose tools had been confiscated stood straight despite his age, his voice clear and strong. "I have lived in this town for 68 years, he began. "I have seen good times and bad, but I have never seen such a betrayal of public trust as what Sheriff Dawson has done to this community. It stops now. It stops with us saying enough." He placed a thick stack of papers on the commissioner's table. "This is a recall petition. It already has more signatures than votes cast in the last sheriff's election. We want Sheila Dawson removed from office permanently." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Commissioner Barnes examined the petition with wide eyes, clearly shocked by the number of signatures. People who had been silent for years had finally found their courage. "The commission will review this petition immediately," she promised. "In the meantime, Deputy Chief Rodriguez will serve as acting sheriff during the investigation." In the days that followed, Sheriff Dawson disappeared from public view. Her department SUV remained parked in her driveway. Her blinds stayed drawn. According to neighbors, she rarely left the house. The badge that had been her identity and her weapon had been taken away, at least temporarily. The state investigation uncovered irregularities beyond what anyone had imagined. Financial audits revealed questionable equipment purchases. Case files contained evidence that had never been submitted to prosecutors. Citations had been issued and later lost, when the fines were paid directly to the department rather than through the court system. 2 weeks after her suspension, I received a call from Patricia. "The county prosecutor wants to meet with us," she said, her voice tense with excitement. "They are considering charges against Dawson, but they need cooperative witnesses." "Charges? What kind of charges?" "Official oppression, abuse of office, possibly even extortion in some cases." Patricia paused. "They particularly want to discuss your case because of the recording. It provides direct evidence of her state of mind and motivations." I agreed to the meeting immediately. As I hung up, Max placed his head in my lap, sensing my agitation. I scratched behind his ears, thinking about how far we had come from that terrible day when I returned home to find him gone. The community was changing too. Deputies began patrolling with a new approach, respectful, professional, focused on actual public safety rather than personal agendas. The town council established a civilian oversight committee for law enforcement. The local paper now regularly published data on citations, arrests, and complaints to ensure transparency. A week later, the news broke. Sheriff Sheila Dawson had resigned her position rather than face potential criminal charges. The resignation came with conditions, however: a settlement negotiated between her attorney and the county prosecutor. "She is agreeing to relinquish her law enforcement credentials," Patricia explained when she called with the news. "She will not be able to work in law enforcement again, anywhere in the state." "What about accountability for what she did?" I asked, disappointed by the lack of criminal charges. "There is one more condition," Patricia said. "As part of the settlement, she has agreed to issue a public apology for her conduct, on camera, specifically addressing her actions regarding you and Max." I sat in silence, absorbing this information. Not jail time, not a trial, but a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing from a woman who had never admitted error in 12 years of misrule. A woman who would now be stripped of the authority she had wielded so ruthlessly for so long. "When?" I asked finally. "Tomorrow noon, at the courthouse steps." As I hung up, I realized that sometimes justice takes unexpected forms. Sometimes, the most powerful punishment is not imprisonment but the public dismantling of a carefully constructed image. Sheila Dawson, who had built her identity on power and fear, would now face the ultimate reckoning: humility. The crowd gathered early outside the courthouse. By 11:30, the steps and surrounding sidewalk were filled with reporters, cameras, curious onlookers, and many of those who had shared their stories at the public forum. The atmosphere was subdued, not celebratory but watchful and expectant. I arrived with Max at my side, his leash held firmly in hand. He had recovered well in the week since his return, his coat regaining its shine, his eyes once more alert and trusting. We found a spot near the back of the crowd where he would not be overwhelmed by the press of people. Mrs. Keller worked her way through the gathering to stand beside me. "Never thought I would see this day," she said, her thin hand patting my arm. "You did this. You stood up when the rest of us stayed quiet for too long." "We all did it," I corrected her gently. "Each person who shared their story, signed the petition, spoke at the forum. We did this together." At precisely noon, a dark sedan pulled up to the curb. The crowd fell silent as Sheila Dawson emerged from the passenger side. She wore civilian clothes, a gray pantsuit instead of her uniform, no badge, no visible symbols of authority. Her attorney accompanied her to a podium that had been set up at the foot of the courthouse steps. She looked different, smaller somehow, without the trappings of office that had defined her for so long. Her face was drawn, her normally perfect hair showing strands of gray I had never noticed before. For the first time, I saw her not as Sheriff Dawson but simply as Sheila, a woman who had lost her way in the pursuit and protection of power. Commissioner Barnes stepped forward first, reading a brief statement about the settlement agreement and the changes being implemented in the sheriff's department. Then she stepped aside, yielding the podium to Sheila. The former sheriff approached slowly, placing a single sheet of paper on the podium's surface. She adjusted the microphone, cleared her throat, and looked out at the assembled crowd. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the distance. I saw no remorse there, only resignation, the look of someone fulfilling an unwelcome obligation. "My name is Sheila Dawson," she began, her voice lacking its usual command. "For 12 years, I served as sheriff of this county. During that time, I was entrusted with significant authority and responsibility." She paused, glancing down at her prepared statement. "It has become apparent that in some instances, I failed to uphold the standards expected of my office. I allowed personal judgment to override proper procedure. I created an environment where members of this community felt targeted rather than protected." The words were carefully crafted, likely by attorneys, but the requirement to speak them aloud was clearly painful for her. She continued, addressing specific incidents. "In the matter concerning Emily Marshall and her dog, I acknowledge that proper procedures were not followed. The animal was seized without the required court order. Subsequent enforcement actions were undertaken in a manner that could be perceived as retaliatory." Could be perceived. Even now she resisted full accountability, but she continued, each word seeming to cost her. "I acknowledge that my actions caused Ms. Marshall distress and violated her rights as a citizen of this county. For this, I am sorry." Her voice caught slightly on the last word, perhaps the first genuine emotion she had shown. "I have agreed to surrender my law enforcement credentials and will not seek or accept any future position in law enforcement. It is my hope that the community can heal and move forward under new leadership." With that, she stepped back from the podium. No questions were taken. Her attorney guided her back to the waiting car, and they drove away as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions that went unanswered. The crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in small groups, processing what they had witnessed. It was not the dramatic moment of contrition some had hoped for, but it was something perhaps more important, an acknowledgement that power has limits, that actions have consequences, that no one is above accountability. I knelt beside Max, running my hands through his fur. He looked up at me with complete trust, unaware of his role in changing an entire community. What had begun with his seizure had ended with the toppling of a system built on intimidation and fear. In the weeks that followed, Cooperville began to transform. Deputy Rodriguez, appointed as interim sheriff, instituted new transparency policies. Deputies received additional training on constitutional rights and proper procedure. The Civilian Oversight Committee began reviewing all citizen complaints. Most importantly, people began to speak freely again, without looking over their shoulders or lowering their voices when discussing local authorities. As for me, I found myself becoming something I had never expected, a voice for those still afraid to speak. People sought my advice when dealing with government agencies. The local ACLU chapter asked me to share my story at community events. I even considered running for a seat on the town council in the next election. 6 months after Sheila's public apology, I sat on my back porch one evening, watching Max explore the yard. The fence had been repaired, properly this time, with a permit and by a licensed contractor. The pine trees separating my property from what had once been Sheila's house swayed gently in the breeze. She had moved away shortly after her resignation, selling the house to a young family with children who delighted in playing with Max when he visited their side of the fence. Justice takes many forms. Sometimes it wears judicial robes and delivers verdicts from high benches. Sometimes it appears in unexpected ways, in community solidarity, in public accountability, in the courage to speak truth to power. And sometimes, as I had learned, it looks like a woman forced to stand before the community she had wronged and admit, however reluctantly, that she had abused their trust. That evening, as Max settled at my feet with a contented sigh, I reflected on how far we had come from those dark days of separation and helplessness. One small act of injustice, the taking of an innocent dog, had exposed a much larger pattern of abuse. One person's stand had inspired a community to find its voice. Max looked up at me, his eyes trusting and peaceful. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest justice of all, not public apologies or resignations, but the quiet restoration of trust. Trust in the system, trust in the community, and most importantly, the trust between a woman and her dog, finally at peace in their quiet house on Maple Street.